This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and My Two Cents. At the moment I'm watching Season 2, Episode 8 of The Boys on Amazon, and the praise this series receives is nothing short of remarkable, at least in the quarters that I'm aware of. And I have a problem with that. Namely, The Boys is not that good. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad in the sense that it's well acted, it's very well shot, it's well produced. It's an interesting show, no doubt about it. But keep in mind something. The Boys was developed by Eric Kripke, who is the person who did Supernatural. A show which this is very similar to, by the way, in a sense that The Boys is all surface. There is very little nuance to it, which is the weirdest thing, because if you're at all aware of Garth Ennis and his work, full of subtext. And in fact, I didn't read The Boys, but I've read other Garth Ennis work. And it's full of subtext. And I would argue, with this type of subject matter, the subtext is the most important thing. The idea of power corrupting, the idea of democracy being controlled by corporations. These are some of the ideas that run through this, and many others. But it doesn't deal with them. And for the most part, what The Boys deals with is expressions of ultraviolence as entertainment. Now don't get me wrong, I love gory movies, no doubt about it. But conversely, when the movie or television show is trying to say something, I don't want gore. The Boys oftentimes wants to say something. You can tell it's trying to say something, but it is deliberately created in a fashion that ensures it says next to nothing. It's a conundrum to me, to be totally honest, because watching it in some ways reminds me of HBO's recent Watchmen series by Damon Lindelof, and how that series was touching upon so many topics. Whether you think it did it as successfully as it could have is less relevant. The point being, though, is it touched on so many topics, and it did so in a way that was very introspective and interesting. While The Boys, despite the violence, and this is an interesting contrast, is a children's show. Sure, there's cursing, sure, there's ultra-violence, but this is a children's show because none of it amounts to anything. This show should not be like this. I mentioned Watchmen, and this show should be in that vein. It should have funny moments. It should have violence, but that shouldn't be the be-all and end-all, which it feels like, having gotten to the second season, that's what it is. It's throwing violence at things instead of conversation, instead of themes that are resonant. Themes that are worth discussing, like the two I mentioned earlier. It just throws violence at things. And like I said, it's not like the Garth Ennis books at all, though that's not really fair. It's like the Garth Ennis books on a very surface, easily digestible type of level. It's making the subject matter more acceptable to the general public. Because keep in mind something, I would never call Garth Ennis' work necessarily something mass market, in the sense that he has his audience. I appreciate his work, but the point being, not everyone did. Because his work was violent, but it was also very thought-provoking, and it was also very interesting, particularly when he was teamed up with great artists. And most importantly, it had something to offer more than an occasional violent scene. This series, Amazon's The Boys, is not a bad series, and if you're interpreting what I'm saying as that, you're not listening. It's not bad. As I said, it's well acted, it's well produced, and it is at times interesting. What I am saying, though, just so we're clear, is that it's shallow. There are no layers to it. And as evidence, they just had a storyline where they dealt with a character called Stormfront, who was a Nazi, at least in her past. Well, I guess once a Nazi, always a Nazi. But it's just the idea that there are all kinds of ideas at work with that, and how that character could have been handled in such an interesting way. Of course it wasn't, which is to say she came off initially as somewhat pushy, and she's revealed to be a Nazi. That's it. There's no resonance to any of this, because it's disposable. And I don't think Garth Ennis's work is that. I mean, look at even Homelander. How ripe for discussion is this character? Look at the head of Vought right now, who's played by the great Giancarlo Esposito. How do they keep a person like that in check? The series never goes into that. And that's not even a particularly deep area of discussion, but just the idea of someone with the power of a Superman. How do you control that person? Especially as depicted in the series, he's a bit of a nut job. He's very unstable mentally, and his power, while being his greatest strength, is also his greatest weakness, in the sense that he relies on nothing else but it. Take it away, he's useless. So how do you handle a character like that, is what I'm asking. The Boys doesn't pay that kind of thinking any mind. It's a blunt instrument. And the problem with blunt instruments, like hammers, everything looks like a nail. In any case, this is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and my 2 cents. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know down below. And since you're there, consider a like or a follow. Peace.